Hello, my loyal royal friends and subjects. I have another tale to read. I won't lie, this is one of those episodes when I didn't have a story prepared, so I was basically searching everywhere until I stumbled upon something that worked for me. The same is probably going to be true for the next episode, but I promise I have the rest of this season figured out. Anyway, for today, I figured I would read a Russian fairy tale. One thing I noticed about Russian folktales, or any Slavic folktales, is that there seems to be reoccurring characters, such as Baba Yaga and Koshchei the Deathless, two figures I would love to visit in the future. Today's story features another recurring figure, a creature known as the firebird, a bird that has beautiful feathers that glow like fire, as the name suggests. Of course, this is not the only bird with fiery plumage that can be found in mythology and folklore. There's Bennu, an ancient Egyptian deity associated with the sun, creation, and rebirth. We also have the Huma, from Iranian folklore. Yet of course, the most famous fiery feathered friend would be none other than the phoenix, an immortal bird that goes through a cycle of dying, usually in a combustion of flames, only to be reborn from its own ashes. Of course, you probably didn't need me to explain what a phoenix is, since I'm positive that most of you are familiar with the bird from the Harry Potter series. Anyway, the firebird appears in a few Russian fairy tales, and the hero of these stories must go on a quest to retrieve the bird. These stories inspired a ballet which also goes by the firebird, with music by the Russian composer Igor Stravinsky. There are mainly two stories with the firebird that I'm familiar with. The first one I considered reading was Tsarevich Ivan, the Firebird and the Grey Wolf, a tale collected by Alexander Afanasiev. This story follows the Arne Thompson Uther tale type 550, The Quest for the Golden Bird, although I guess this tale type also goes by The Bird, the Horse, and the Princess. In this story, there are three young princes, the youngest being our hero, who are each given a task to capture the Firebird for their father, who just has to have it for no good reason. At least in other versions of this story, the bird has the ability to heal the king's sickness and oldness, usually with its beautiful voice. I considered reading this story, but I realized that it was too similar to another story that I would like to read one day, a tale called The Water of Life, by the Brothers Grimm. Of course it's a story by the Brothers Grimm that I want to read. I don't know if you noticed, but I'm a little obsessed with the Grimm Bros. Granted, The Water of Life is part of tale type 551, not 550, but the stories are still too similar in my opinion, since they both feature three sons on a quest to retrieve something for their father. Maybe I'll revisit Tsarevich Ivan, the Firebird, and the Grey Wolf, but that's not a guarantee. Still, there is a second story that features the Firebird. It's called The Firebird, the Horse of Power, and the Princess Vasalissa, retold by Arthur Ransome in his book, Old Peter's Russian Tales. In this tale, our hero, a young archer, is also sent to retrieve the Firebird for his Tsar, who is definitely not his father, and as you'll soon see, should be nobody's father. This story falls under the ATU tale type 531, which seems to go by the name of The Clever Horse. Let's go ahead and begin reading. This is The Firebird, the Horse of Power, and the Princess Vasalissa, by Arthur Ransome. Once upon a time, a strong and powerful Tsar ruled in a country far away, and among his servants was a young archer, and this archer had a horse of power. Such a horse as belonged to the wonderful men of long ago, a great horse with a broad chest, eyes like fire, and hoofs of iron. There are no such horses nowadays. They sleep with the strong men who rode them, the bogatirs, until the time comes when Russia has need of them. Then the great horses will thunder up from under the ground, and the valiant men leap from the graves in the armor they have worn so long. The strong men will sit those horses of power, and there will be swinging of clubs and thunder of hoofs, and the earth will be swept clean from the enemies of God and the Tsar. So my grandfather used to say, and he was as much older than I as I am older than you, little ones, and so he should know. I noticed that in many Russian fairy tales that I've read, there seem to be a lot of powerful horses. In the story I mentioned earlier, Tsarevich Ivan, the Firebird, and the Grey Wolf, there is a horse with a golden mane. there is also a powerful horse that the hero rides in a story about Koschei the Deathless, and Baba Yaga is said to have horsemen near her home. That's just something that struck my interest, and maybe we'll see more wise and powerful horses in Slavic fairy tales that we'll read in the future. Well, one day long ago, in the green time of the year, the young archer rode through the forest on his horse of power. The trees were green. There were little blue flowers on the ground under the trees. The squirrels ran in the branches and the hares in the undergrowth. But no birds sang. The young archer rode along the forest path and listened for the singing of the birds, but there was no singing. The forest was silent, and the only noises in it were the scratching of four-footed beasts, the dropping of fir cones, and the heavy stamping of the horse of power in the soft path. "What has come to the birds?" said the young archer. He had scarcely said this before he saw a big curving feather lying in the path before him. The feather was larger than a swan's, larger than an eagle's. It lay in the path, glittering like a flame, for the sun was on it, and it was a feather of pure gold. Then he knew why there was no singing in the forest, for he knew that the firebird had flown that way, and that the feather in the path before him was a feather from its burning breast. The horse of power spoke and said, "Leave the golden feather where it lies. If you take it, you will be sorry for it, and know the meaning of fear." But the brave young archer sat on the horse of power and looked at the golden feather, and wondered whether to take it or not. He had no wish to learn what it was to be afraid, but he thought, "If I take it and bring it to the Tsar, my master, he will be pleased, and he will not send me away with empty hands, for no Tsar in the world has a feather from the burning breast of the firebird." And the more he thought, the more he wanted to carry the feather to the Tsar, and in the end he did not listen to the words of the horse of power. He leapt from the saddle, picked up the golden feather of the firebird, mounted his horse again, and galloped back through the green forest till he came to the palace of the Tsar. He went to the palace and bowed before the Tsar and said, "O Tsar, I have brought you a feather of the firebird." The Tsar looked gladly at the feather and then at the young archer.
"Thank you," says he, "but if you have brought me a feather of the firebird, you will be able to bring me the bird itself. I should like to see it. A feather is not a fit gift to bring to the Tsar. Bring the bird itself, or I swear by my sword, your head shall no longer sit between your shoulders."
The young archer bowed his head and went out. Bitterly he wept, for he knew now what it was to be afraid. He went out into the courtyard, where the horse of power was waiting for him, tossing its head and stamping on the ground. "Master," says the horse of power, "why do you weep?" "The Tsar has told me to bring him the firebird, and no man on earth can do that," says the young archer, and he bowed his head on his breast. "I told you," says the horse of power, "that if you took the feather you would learn the meaning of fear. Well, do not be frightened yet, and do not weep. The trouble is not now. The trouble lies before you. Go to the Tsar and ask him to have 100 sacks of maize scattered over the open field, and let this be done at midnight." The young archer went back into the palace and begged the Tsar for this, and the Tsar ordered that at midnight 100 sacks of maize should be scattered in the open field. Next morning, at the first redness in the sky, the young archer rode out on the horse of power and came to the open field. The ground was scattered all over with maize. In the middle of the field stood a great oak with spreading boughs. The young archer leapt to the ground, took off the saddle, and let the horse of power loose to wander as he pleased about the field. Then he climbed up into the oak and hid himself among the green boughs. The sky grew red and gold, and the sun rose. Suddenly there was a noise in the forest round the field. The trees shook and swayed and almost fell. There was a mighty wind. The sea piled itself into waves with crests of foam, and the firebird came flying from the other side of the world. Huge and golden and flaming in the sun, it flew, dropped down with open wings into the field, and began to eat the maize. The horse of power wandered in the field. This way he went, and that, but always he came a little nearer to the firebird. Nearer and nearer came the horse. He came close up to the firebird, and then suddenly stepped on one of its spreading fiery wings and pressed it heavily to the ground. The bird struggled, flapping mightily with its fiery wings, but it could not get away. The young archer slipped down from the tree, bound the firebird with 3 strong ropes, swung it on his back, saddled the horse, and rode to the palace of the Tsar. The young archer stood before the Tsar, and his back was bent under the great weight of the firebird, and the broad wings of the bird hung on either side of him like fiery shields, and there was a trail of golden feathers on the floor. The young archer swung the magic bird to the foot of the throne before the Tsar, and the Tsar was glad because since the beginning of the world no Tsar had seen the firebird flung before him like a wild duck caught in a snare. The Tsar looked at the firebird and laughed with pride. Then he lifted his eyes and looked at the young archer, and says he,
"As you have known how to take the firebird, you will know how to bring me my bride, for whom I have long been waiting. In the land of Never, on the very edge of the world, where the red sun rises in flame from behind the sea, lives the Princess Vasalissa. I will marry none but her. Bring her to me, and I will reward you with silver and gold. But if you do not bring her, then, by my sword, your head will no longer sit between your shoulders."
I hope I don't damage my vocal cords after this. In the other story about the firebird, the hero, whose name is Ivan, a very common name in Russian fairy tales, is also given a task of retrieving a princess for an evil king who wants her for his bride. Apparently, evil kings can't take a hint from the princesses they so desire to wed that they need the hero to basically steal them away. Let's see how our young archer deals with this task. The young archer wept bitter tears and went out to the courtyard, where the horse of power was, stamping the ground with its hoofs of iron and tossing its thick mane. "Master, why do you weep?" asked the horse of power. "The Tsar has ordered me to go to the land of Never and to bring back the Princess Vasalissa." "Do not weep. Do not grieve. The trouble is not yet. The trouble is to come. Go to the Tsar and ask him for a silver tent with a golden roof, and for all kinds of food and drink to take with us on the journey." The young archer went in and asked the Tsar for this, and the Tsar gave him a silver tent with silver hangings and a gold-embroidered roof, and every kind of rich wine and the tastiest of foods. Then the young archer mounted the horse of power and rode off to the land of Never. By the way, no, it's not Neverland. On and on he rode, many days and nights, and came at last to the edge of the world, where the red sun rises in flame from behind the deep blue sea. On the shore of the sea the young archer reined in the horse of power, and the heavy hoofs of the horse sank in the sand. He shaded his eyes and looked out over the blue water, and there was the Princess Vasilissa in a little silver boat, rowing with golden oars. The young archer rowed back a little way to where the sand ended and the green world began. There he loosed the horse to wander where he pleased, and to feed on the green grass. Then, on the edge of the shore, where the green grass ended and grew thin and the sand began, he set up the shining tent, with its silver hangings and its gold-embroidered roof. In the tent he set out the tasty dishes and the rich flagons of the wine which the Tsar had given him, and he sat himself down in the tent and began to regale himself, while he waited for the Princess Vasilissa. The Princess Vasilissa dipped her golden oars in the blue water, and the little silver boat moved lightly through the dancing waves. She sat in the little boat and looked over the blue sea to the edge of the world, and there, between the golden sand and the green earth, she saw the tent standing, silver and gold in the sun. She dipped her oars and came nearer to see it the better. The nearer she came, the fairer seemed the tent, and at last she rowed to the shore and grounded her little boat on the golden sand, and stepped out daintily and came up to the tent. She was a little frightened, and now and again she stopped and looked back to where the silver boat lay on the sand with the blue sea beyond it. The young archer said not a word, but went on regaling himself on the pleasant dishes he had set out there in the tent. At last the Princess Vasilissa came up to the tent and looked in. The young archer rose and bowed before her. Says he, "Good day to you, Princess. Be so kind as to come in and take bread and salt with me, and taste my foreign wines." And the Princess Vasalissa came into the tent and sat down with the young archer, and ate sweetmeats with him, and drank his health in a golden goblet of the wine the Tsar had given him. Now this wine was heavy, and the last drop from the goblet had no sooner trickled down her little slender throat than her eyes closed against her will. Once, twice, and again. "I'm not sure how I feel about tricking a woman with food and alcohol. Oh, wait, yes I do. Don't do it."
"Ah me," says the princess. "It is as if the night itself had perched on my eyelids, and yet it is but noon."
And the golden goblet dropped to the ground from her little fingers, and she leant back on a cushion and fell instantly asleep. If she had been beautiful before, she was lovelier still when she lay in that deep sleep in the shadow of the tent. Look, I'm not one of those people who are against the innocent true love's kiss in Disney's Sleeping Beauty and Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, but this is just disturbing. While Aurora and Snow White were awakened with a simple kiss from gentlemen who meant them no harm, and gentlemen that they had already met and fell in love with in the span of 2 minutes, but whatever, it's a fairy tale, this guy straight up drugged her and has the gall to think she's more beautiful while she's unconscious. Look, I know, pretty people look prettier when they're asleep, or they might not be, but still, why do we have to be creepy about it sometimes? I know that he's the hero whose life has been threatened unless he tricks the princess into marrying the evil Tsar, but this is still creepy. Quickly, the young archer called to the horse of power. Lightly, he lifted the princess in his strong young arms. This doesn't make it better. Swiftly, he leapt with her into the saddle. Like a feather, she lay in the hollow of his left arm, and slept while the iron hoofs of the great horse thundered over the ground. This isn't legal! They came to the Tsar's palace, and the young archer leapt from the horse of power and carried the princess into the palace. Great was the joy of the Tsar, but it did not last for long.
"Go, sound the trumpets for our wedding," he said to the servants. "Let all the bells be rung."
The bells rang out and the trumpets sounded, and at the noise of the horns and the ringing of the bells, the Princess Vasalissa woke up and looked about her.
"What is this ringing of bells?" says she, "and this noise of trumpets? And where, oh, where is the blue sea, and my little silver boat with its golden oars?"
And the princess put her hand to her eyes.
"The blue sea is far away," says the Tsar, "and for your little silver boat I give you a golden throne. The trumpets sound for our wedding, and the bells are ringing for our joy."
But the princess turned her face away from the Tsar, and there was no wonder in that, for he was old and his eyes were not kind. And she looked with love at the young archer, and there was no wonder in that either, for he was a young man fit to ride the horse of power. He kidnapped you, girl! The Tsar was angry with the Princess Vasalissa, but his anger was as useless as his joy.
"Why, princess," says he, "will you not marry me, and forget your blue sea and your silver boat?"
"Oh, I don't know. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that I was kidnapped and am now expected to marry someone I don't even know or even like against my will. I'm a human being, not a piece of treasure that you can just slap a wife label on,"
is what she should have said. Instead, she says this.
"In the middle of the deep blue sea lies a great stone," says the princess, "and under that stone is hidden my wedding dress. If I cannot wear that dress, I will marry nobody at all."
Ah, I see what you did there. Instantly, the Tsar turned to the young archer, who was waiting before the throne.
"Ride swiftly back," says he, "to the land of Never where the red sun rises in flame. There, do you hear what the princess says? A great stone lies in the middle of the sea. Under that stone is hidden her wedding dress. Ride swiftly. Bring back that dress, or by my sword your head shall no longer sit between your shoulders."
Yeah, we get it. The young archer wept bitter tears and went out into the courtyard, where the horse of power was waiting for him, champing its golden bit.
"There is no way of escaping death this time," he said.
"Master, why do you weep?" asked the horse of power.
The Tsar has ordered me to ride to the land of Never, to fetch the wedding dress of the Princess Vasalissa from the bottom of the deep blue sea. Besides, the dress is wanted for the Tsar's wedding, and I love the princess myself."
"Oh, boo-hoo, you kidnapped her!"
"What did I tell you?" says the Horse of Power. "I told you that there would be trouble if you picked up the golden feather from the firebird's burning breast. Well, do not be afraid. The trouble is not yet. The trouble is to come. Up, into the saddle with you, and away for the wedding dress of the Princess Vasalissa." The young archer leapt into the saddle, and the Horse of Power, with his thundering hoofs, carried him swiftly through the green forests and over the bare plains, till they came to the edge of the world, to the land of Never, where the red sun rises in flame from behind the deep blue sea. There they rested, at the very edge of the sea. The young archer looked sadly over the wide waters, but the Horse of Power tossed its mane and did not look at the sea, but on the shore. This way and that it looked, and saw at last a huge lobster moving slowly, sideways, along the golden sand. Nearer and nearer came the lobster, and it was a giant among lobsters, the Tsar of all the lobsters, and it moved slowly along the shore, while the Horse of Power moved carefully, and as if by accident, until it stood between the lobster and the sea. Then, when the lobster came close by, the Horse of Power lifted an iron hoof and set it firmly on the lobster's tail. "You will be the death of me!" screamed the lobster, as well he might, with the heavy foot of the Horse of Power pressing his tail into the sand. "Let me live, and I will do whatever you ask of me." "Very well," says the Horse of Power. "We will let you live." And he slowly lifted his foot. "But this is what you shall do for us. In the middle of the blue sea lies a great stone, and under that stone is hidden the wedding dress of the Princess Vasalissa. Bring it here." The lobster groaned with the pain in his tail. Then he cried out in a voice that could be heard all over the deep blue sea, and the sea was disturbed, and from all sides lobsters in thousands made their way towards the bank. And the huge lobster that was the oldest of them all, and the Tsar of all the lobsters that live between the rising and the setting of the sun, gave them the order and sent them back into the sea. And the young archer sat on the Horse of Power and waited. After a little time the sea was disturbed again, and the lobsters in their thousands came to the shore, and with them they brought a golden casket in which was the wedding dress of the Princess Vasalissa. They had taken it from under the great stone that lay in the middle of the sea. The Tsar of all the lobsters raised himself painfully on his bruised tail and gave the casket into the hands of the young archer, and instantly the Horse of Power turned himself about and galloped back to the palace of the Tsar, far, far away, at the other side of the green forests and beyond the treeless plains. The young archer went into the palace and gave the casket into the hands of the princess, and looked at her with sadness in his eyes, and she looked at him with love, for reasons I'll never understand. Then she went away into an inner chamber and came back in her wedding dress, fairer than the spring itself. Great was the joy of the Tsar. The wedding feast was made ready, and the bells rang and flags waved above the palace. The Tsar held out his hand to the princess and looked at her with his old eyes, but she would not take his hand. "No," says she, "I will marry nobody until the man who brought me here has done penance in boiling water."
I mean, he did kidnap her, but I personally would have settled with something that is not a gruesome death.
Instantly the Tsar turned to his servants and ordered them to make a great fire, and to fill a great cauldron with water and set it on the fire, and when the water should be at its hottest, to take the young archer and throw him into it, to do penance for having taken the Princess Vasalissa away from the land of Never.
Didn't you order him to take the princess in the first place?
There was no gratitude in the mind of that Tsar.
Well, no kidding, story.
Swiftly the servants brought wood and made a mighty fire, and on it they laid a huge cauldron of water, and built the fire round the walls of the cauldron. The fire burned hot, and the water steamed. The fire burned hotter, and the water bubbled and seethed. They made ready to take the young archer, to throw him into the cauldron. "Oh, misery!" thought the young archer. "Why did I ever take the golden feather that had fallen from the firebird's burning breast?
Why did I not listen to the wise words of the Horse of Power? And he remembered the Horse of Power, and he begged the Tsar, "O Lord Tsar, I do not complain. I shall presently die in the heat of the water on the fire. Suffer me before I die once more to see my horse."
"Let him see his horse," says the princess.
Very well, says the Tsar. Say goodbye to your horse, for you will not ride him again. But let your farewells be short, for we are waiting.
The young archer crossed the courtyard and came to the Horse of Power, who was scraping the ground with his iron hoofs. "Farewell, my Horse of Power," says the young archer. "I should have listened to your words of wisdom, for now the end is come, and we shall never more see the green trees pass above us and the ground disappear beneath us as we race the wind between the earth and the sky." "Why so?" says the Horse of Power. "The Tsar has ordered that I am to be boiled to death, thrown into the cauldron that is seething on the great fire." "Fear not," says the Horse of Power, "for the Princess Vasalissa has made him do this, and the end of these things is better than I thought. Go back, and when they are ready to throw you into the cauldron, do you run boldly and leap yourself into the boiling water." The young archer went back across the courtyard, and the servants made ready to throw him into the cauldron.
"Are you sure that the water is boiling?"
says the Princess Vasalissa. "It bubbles and seethes," said the servants.
"Let me see for myself,"
says the princess, and she went to the fire and waved her hand above the cauldron. And some say there was something in her hand, and some say there was not. "It is boiling," says she, and the servants laid hands on the young archer, but he threw them from him, and ran and leapt boldly before them all into the very middle of the cauldron. Twice he sank below the surface, borne round with the bubbles and foam of the boiling water. Then he leapt from the cauldron, and stood before the Tsar and the princess. He had become so beautiful a youth that all who saw cried aloud in wonder.
"This is a miracle,"
says the Tsar, and the Tsar looked at the beautiful young archer, and thought of himself, of his age, of his bent back, and his gray beard, and his toothless gums.
"I too will become beautiful,"
thinks he, and he rose from his throne and clambered into the cauldron, and was boiled to death in a moment. This sounds a lot like how Medea killed King Peleus, the evil uncle of her husband Jason. Since she's a sorceress, she showed her powers to Peleus's daughters, cutting up an old ram into pieces, which she put in a stew, and out sprung a young ram. The daughters wanted the same treatment done to their father, so they all cut him into pieces, yet instead of a younger Peleus springing out of the stew, there was only a dead Peleus. In this case, Princess Vasalissa is Medea, the archer is the ram, and the Tsar is Peleus. Let's just hope that the princess and archer aren't exactly like Medea and Jason. Otherwise, their relationship is a lot more screwed up than I thought. And the end of the story? They buried the Tsar and made the young archer Tsar in his place. He married the Princess Vasalissa and lived many years with her in love and good fellowship. And he built a golden stable for the Horse of Power, and never forgot what he owed to him. The end! I noticed that the firebird just disappeared from this story. I guess it's more of a trophy than an actual character in its own story. Now comes the part of the episode where I talk about what we can learn from this story and how it can be interpreted today. I have heard that this magnificent bird can be an omen of fortune or misery to its captor. And if that's true, then this definitely shows in our story. Our young archer did not heed the advice of his Horse of Power. If he had only listened and left the golden feather alone, then he could have avoided having his life threatened by the Tsar. Yet, in the end, the quest for the firebird brought him fortune and happiness. We must be sure to listen to the advice of those who wish to help us. And even if we make mistakes, we can always learn from them, turn to loved ones for help, and maybe then we can find fortune and happiness of our own. Just please don't roofie anyone, especially if it's someone you've taken a fancy to. Seriously, no happiness is worth drugging other people. I hope you all enjoyed today's story, and I hope you'll join me again for the next one. Until next time, my friends, may all your dreams come true, and fare thee well. Bye-bye!